Welcome to the Climate Conscious Podcast. I'm your host, Derval Barzey. Here at the Climate Conscious Podcast, we're all about continual improvement. Please click the link in the show notes to complete a short survey to let us know how we can improve. We really appreciate your feedback. Welcome to the show, Khadija Stewart.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me, Khadija. Khadija Stewart is an ocean enthusiast and climate specialist from Trinidad and Tobago. She uses innovative storytelling as a catalyst to raise awareness and mobilize behavior change. She holds an MSc in Climate Change and Development from SOAS University of London, as well as a second MSc in Sustainable Development and Management Studies from Kingston University, London. Presently, she is the founder of EcoVibes Environmental Creatives, a company focused on opening access to environmental knowledge, building young leaders, and developing impactful environmental content creation centered on climate change, ocean conservation, and water resources. She's also the host of the EcoVibes podcast and the Caribbean regional representative for Sustainable Ocean Alliance, working on deep sea mining. Now, this is just a snapshot of the incredible work Khadija has been involved with, and I will share more on our social media profiles. But I want to get into today's discussion. So, Khadija, you are passionate about increasing youth engagement in climate action, specifically the nexus of ocean conservation and climate change. Why is this important for you?
Oh my gosh. Such a big question. Why is it important to me? So, first of all, being from the Caribbean, being from a small island developing state, and living so close to the beach and having access to the ocean, and throughout the years, seeing how it has changed, and then experiencing the impacts of climate change and seeing how that in itself is affecting our oceans, and then how our oceans is the biggest ally to help with climate change. It's just like, to me, it just makes sense. It just click, and it's just like this is where my calling fell, and here we are.
Here we are. Now, today we're here to speak about deep sea mining. And depending on who you ask, deep sea mining, deep sea mining holds great promise or it spells great disaster. Once confined to science fiction, technological advancement now allows us to push the boundaries of resource extraction. Today, we are delving into deep sea mining and the complex ethical, environmental, and regulatory challenges associated with this controversial activity. So, Khadija, can you provide our listeners with a brief overview of what is deep sea mining and why it is gaining so much attention in the recent years?
Yeah, okay. So, guys, buckle up, get comfortable. This is a very in-depth topic. I will try my best to keep it as summarized as possible, but here we go. So, deep sea mining essentially is the process of extracting and often excavating mineral deposits from the deep seabed. And the deep seabed is basically the seabed at ocean depths greater than 200 meters, and it covers about two-thirds of the total seafloor. And research has suggested that, that deep sea mining could have environmental impacts, but it is gaining a lot of traction because the supporters of deep sea mining, and I use supporters very loosely, they are interested in polymetallic nodules, and these can be found, in the abyssal plains, which is the deepest and flattest part of the ocean floor. They're literally like small, they look like potatoes, and it's just filled with all these different metals and mineral resources. And then there's the mineral deposits on the terrestrial plane, sorry, or the hydrothermal vents. And all of these are home to things like zinc, copper, nickel, etc. You name it, things that, is being advertised as some of the materials needed for the green revolution. And this is the greenwashing tactic that is being spread as why we need to go down to the deep sea and get these materials.
Thank you for that brief overview. And you mentioned a couple of interesting things. You mentioned the supporters, and of course, I have to ask you, who are these? As well as, well, you outlined the mineral deposits such as zinc, copper, nickel, and
Mm-hmm.
you drew the connection, an important connection to the green revolution and the issue of greenwashing. And it sounds as though in trying to solve one problem, we are creating another. But I don't want to get ahead of the conversation, but yeah, maybe share a bit about who are these supporters or the proponents of deep sea mining.
Right. So the supporters is it's really mainly one big company, and this is the Metals Company, which is a Canadian-based company, and they have smaller subsidiary bodies underneath them, but they are the main ones, and they allow some of the states in the Pacific Islands because a company can't decide to go and mine in international waters. They have to be sponsored by a state. So you have some of the states like Nauru, who in the Pacific, who are very much interested in the proposed economic benefits of deep sea mining. And yeah, and interestingly enough, because this is a Caribbean-based podcast, we also have a company sponsored by Jamaica, which is the Jamaican Blue Minerals, who also very much interested in deep sea mining. So this is why, trying to bring it back to the region and why it might be an issue, because there are people in the region also interested in this very extractive and dangerous industry.
I have been following your advocacy work with SOA. So I would love to know what led you to become so involved in this process.
Right. So I had never heard about deep sea mining in my life. It's just like, because there's so many environmental problems that there's so many different things that get like swept under the rug. So again, working in the Caribbean, some of the biggest issues we have right now, pollution, coastal erosion, sea level rise, sargassum. Sargassum is a big one. Marine degradation, things like ghost gear, sea turtles, all these different things. There's so many other problems. And deep sea mining was just something that was completely not on my radar. But working with Sustainable Ocean Alliance, they joined what is now known, what is called the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition as an organization speaking up against the deep sea mining. And I was just like, that was the first time I heard of it. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? How are people considering going and mine the deep sea? Like, that doesn't even make sense to me. Because as far as I'm concerned, like, we don't even have the materials, the technologies to carry us down there. Like we saw what happened when some people went to look for the Titanic, right? So where are you going? To do what? And SOA was very much, advocating for it. And I started reading up more. And I was just like, oh, this is very interesting. And then when I realized that the International Seabed Authority, which is the body responsible for the rules and regulations of deep sea mining, as well as protecting the deep sea bed, was housed in Kingston, Jamaica. I was just like, you telling me these decisions are literally being made in my backyard and I don't know about it? Like, that is wild. So again, started doing more and more reading, more and more research. And then Sustainable Ocean Alliance was very interested in having youth present at these meetings. And because I was the Caribbean regional representative, they were like, Khadija, you are the one to go. So myself and actually the Hispano America regional rep, we were the first two youth representatives present in this space last year, July. And from then, we just became fully immersed in the topic, fully involved, and we've been going to the meetings ever since and using our voice to raise awareness on the issue.
Wow. Well, that's so interesting because I also have to admit that deep sea mining was never on my radar either, but thanks to the work of SOA and your advocacy work as well, it has been coming across my timeline and I've been realizing that this is an issue that we should be paying attention to. So many people are concerned about the potential environmental impacts of deep sea mining. And we know that environmental issues are not siloed. They often and usually intersect with social and economic issues. So can you share some of the environmental and also social and economic issues or concerns associated with this industry?
Yeah, so let me start with concerns. And one of the biggest concerns right now is that we simply don't have enough information to be able to make a decision. We don't have enough science. We don't have enough studies. We just don't, there's just so much that we don't know. And the common statement when we're talking about deep sea mining and the deep sea is that we know more about the moon, something that is so far away than we know about the deep sea, right? So let's start there as one of the biggest concerns. It's just that we don't know how this industry will have, effects, etc. We know to some extent, but there's still so much that we don't know. So starting from there. But the deep sea is literally the largest habitat for life on planet, and it is home to like a vast variety of unique species and ecosystems, basically being, like I said, a wealth of biodiversity, right? And this ecosystem is something that just has not been interfered with. It has taken millions of years to form, and there's so much life that depends on different things happening within the deep sea. And the moment you go and disrupt that, it come like a food chain or like a food web. When you just move one thing and you thinking, oh, well, this is something small, it's not going to have a bigger impact. And then you realize, wait a minute, things starting to shift in the whole system. All of a sudden, you have overpopulation of one species and you're trying to figure out why. And it's because you got rid of X. And this is one of the biggest concerns that people have is that by interfering with, because what some of these polymetallic modules do. They act as like a home for so many key species. And by removing that, you're removing a chemical process that is naturally occurring in the ocean. And we really don't know what is going to happen if we get rid of this home that is so important and needed. And then, as I mentioned, the deep sea is literally one of our biggest allies against climate change in regulating and circulating, CO2. So again, interfering with that. Why? It's
Yeah.
just like, yeah, but apart from that, of course, the obvious things like species destruction, species degradation, as well as habitat removal. I mentioned this. And one of the issues with deep sea mining is that because it's so far down, how it's supposed to take place is like you will have this huge, long tube and things would like vacuum the seafloor. And I'm saying vacuum like it's not like a light swiffer passing on the seafloor. Think of like a vacuum with claws or something like that, passing on the seafloor, literally destroying ecosystems and all the structures that exist down there. There's no way that they could go down there and just, oh, I'm going to touch this and not touch that, which is what they're kind of advertising, right? And that's completely impossible. And when that material gets pulled up to the surface by the ship, the other material that is not wanted, that would then be put back into the ocean. And that is literally called a sediment plume. And this is where we have problems that might occur in the water column at different levels, because again, that is pollution. You're introducing materials that not accustomed being existed in that space. So we really don't know what is going to happen and how it's going to be affected. And things like toxic compounds, etc., released back into the ocean in a space where it's not accustomed being. And it's just like a recipe for disaster. And some studies currently being conducted, and one of our fellow regional scientists who is from Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Diva Amon, she and several other scientists recently released a paper saying that tuna fish, because of deep sea mining, could be severely impacted. And most of us, we see tuna everywhere when you enter the grocery, whether you eat it or not, right? But there are a lot of us that eat it. And the fisheries industry is something that is there and near to most Caribbean people. So by interfering with that, then problems. So, and it's just like a ripple effect of problems. And there's noise pollution with the marine vessels, etc. Some of these vessels already carrying species that don't belong, introductory invasive species, kind of like what happened with cruise ships sometimes, the anthropogenic noise, etc. Light pollution, because the deep sea is areas that is completely dark, which is why sometimes when you see some of these species, they look so, bioluminescent, they look great, they look majestic because they have all these different traits that they develop to survive in such harsh conditions. And when humans go and interfere in it and start introducing things like light, this is not something that they are accustomed to once again, and can cause serious disturbances. And then there's the economic problems that you mentioned as well that would occur. And well, the industry has not yet been evaluated, let's say efficiently, or evaluated at a point where you could say confidently, yes, this is the price for the minerals that you would have collected from deep sea mining, and this is the market for it, right? That currently does not exist. So right now you have states who are literally taking a gamble or taking a chance. They might not make any money from this. And this was the case with Papua New Guinea, when mining, they decided to do exploration mining in Papua New Guinea, and it just did not end well, and the country has been left with a debt of over 100 million USD that they just cannot afford right now. And it's just like, we're not trying to have history repeat itself, because Papua New Guinea is a small island developing state, and there are people. This leads to other economic problems, other social problems, etc. There is just so many uncertainties and so many things that could go wrong, that most likely would go wrong. And it's just like, once this industry is green lighted, and we've seen it, what happens? Capitalism wins, right? Once something gets the green light to go ahead, it is going to become severely commercialized, and there will be no stopping it. Worse yet, if it is done with poor rules and regulations and managed by a body that is unable to effectively uphold those rules and regulations, which is the International Seabed Authority. But I feel like I could keep going, but I would stop there.
There's so much to unpack. But just listening to you, it sounds crazy to me. But we like to take a balanced approach to things on here on the Climate Conscious podcast. So I must ask, are there any benefits to deep sea mining in your view?
In my personal view, no. I say that I don't see it. I don't see it. The science is very clear in that there's so much that we don't know. So it's like going down there in with a huge levels of uncertainty. To me, that doesn't make any sense. So it's like, why would you do it? This is beyond taking a leap of faith, right? Because sometimes when life is telling, yes, have faith, go for it, take that leap, make that jump. This is not that. Right. And I also believe that the dollars and cents, the economics behind the industry, that to me does not make any sense. And I'm saying that because right now there's so many companies that have been saying that they're not going to use minerals mined from the deep sea. So who is the market for these things? Who are you going to sell it to? Who is buying it? What is the point? And big companies like Samsung, Google, etc., Tesla even, and they're saying that they're not going to use it. And we see technology constantly evolving, and they're already finding other ways to make some of these batteries in cars and in the phones, etc., where they're claiming that these minerals are needed. So it's just like, again, where is the market? And there's so many studies that has been done that has said, that the valuation for some of these minerals are going to go down. So profit margins not really existing, etc. So, and then it's expensive because it's the deep sea. It is if the metals company has invested so much money into a possibility. And I honestly feel like that's one of the reasons why they've been pushing for it so much, because they've already lost millions in the industry. And it's like now they're getting at a point where they're borderline desperate and need to make, because it's like I said, just going down to the deep sea alone is a lot. And we don't even have proper processes in place, proper technology. So I don't know. And this is one of the reasons why we've been calling for a precautionary pause. And the precautionary pause is based with the precautionary principle, right? That lack of knowledge, lack of science, etc. Like that is, you shouldn't have everything in place to be able to say, okay, no, not yet, not now, etc. You can make that decision right now. And that's basically the precautionary principle, right? And that's why we call in for the pause to be like, hey, we need time.
It seems like we are hell bent on changing fiction into nonfiction. But it's amazing that given the existing challenges of climate change and loss and damage, that we can still find resources to allocate to an activity that has so much uncertainty around it.
Yeah.
And that threatens our oceans, threatens our marine ecosystems, threatens our economic systems, as you mentioned, the tuna industry.
Yeah, and I was just like, even when I was talking before and I was thinking, I was just like, one of the things that almost everybody had at one point in time was a BlackBerry. Everybody was BBMing, etc. And then now all of a sudden the technology shifted, it evolved, it grew, it changed, and people have iPhones, Samsung, etc. And that BlackBerry technology died and we no longer use it, right? Which is basically what people are saying is why we don't need deep sea mining, because the technology is moving. So we don't need to be using those mineral deposits. And we already have mining taking place on land that is causing so many problems. And there's so many other solutions that we could tap into on land. Why it is that we're going to add a whole new problem when we have the opportunity for the first time to prevent the extractive industry before it starts? It's like, do we allow history to repeat itself, or do we for once take a stand,
Yeah, we definitely need to take a stand, and the first step to that is ensuring that persons are more aware, bringing this issue to light and bringing more persons into the discussions. You mentioned earlier about meetings in Jamaica, being a youth representative, the ISA, rules and regulations. So can you share a bit about that and the status of negotiations and the development of regulations for deep sea mining?
Okay. So we have to take a few steps back. So most of the deep sea mining that we're talking about is expected to take place in international waters, right? So this is beyond the territorial waters of any country, where governance and enforcement of regulation depend on international agreements. And basically they're currently lacking when it comes to deep sea mining, right? But since 1994, with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, the International Seabed Authority, the ISA, has been responsible for developing rules, regulations, and procedures associated with seabed minerals and the authority to oversee related developments in international waters, right? And the legal framework for governing human activity on the ocean depends on the distance from land, right? And a coastal state's territorial sea, in accordance with the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, extends to basically 12 nautical miles, which is 22 kilometers from its coastline, right? And it includes air, space, the water body, to the seabed, and the subsoil, right? And coastal states have exclusive rights and jurisdiction over resources within their 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, the EEZ. Some states have an extended continental shelf beyond the EEZ, within which they have sovereign rights over the seabed and any mineral resources, though not over the water column. Further out to the sea is the area beyond national jurisdiction, which is a term used to describe both the seabed area and the high seas water column above the seabed. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, designates that area as common heritage of mankind, right? And the legal framework for the area is provided by, like I said, UNCLOS, and responsibility for regulation and control of mineral-related activities in the area is basically with the International Seabed Authority, and it is comprised of the states that have ratified UNCLOS. Just wanted to provide a little context so that we know what basically where we're talking about. So areas beyond national jurisdiction, what's governing it, UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and then the body responsible, the International Seabed Authority, and then that is made up basically of all the states that ratified UNCLOS. Right. So they've been having meetings basically. Well, the first meeting I went to was last year, July, meeting in November, council meetings, and then assembly meetings. And things were, last year, we had basically the bare minimum countries calling for like a precautionary pause on deep sea mining. They didn't even want to use the word precautionary pause. They didn't even want to use the word moratorium. They didn't think it was something that was possible. But 2 years ago, the state NARU that I mentioned earlier, they triggered underneath UNCLOS something called the 2-year rule, which stated that regulations had to be developed basically within the 2-year rule period, and if not, then they could apply for a mining license, right? So basically submit an application to go ahead and start deep sea mining. And so from that moment until now, because the rule ended in July this year, at the last meeting, they've been working towards one piece, working towards adopting and finishing the regulations, and next piece, working towards the development of a precautionary pause, and then next piece, how do we tie in everything else how do we tie in everything that is happening in deep sea mining with all the different international treaties, example, the BBNJ. So as it stands right now, the International Seabed Authority, they've granted just about 31 contracts for exploration. So only exploration contracts of around 1.5 million kilometers squared of ocean. But they've been under a lot of pressure to finalize and adopt regulations because of NARU, like I mentioned. But there've been countries since last year that have been seriously pushing back. And some of these countries are Palau, Vanuatu, Chile, Costa Rica, France. France is the only country that has come out right and said we need a complete ban on deep sea mining. And what started as 0 countries calling for a pause, now we have about over 14 countries on board with it. So there's been like a lot of tension happening at the meetings because there's NARU who's very much interested in getting things, done and finished. And then you have all these different countries who are like, no, we need to stop. We need to think about future generations. We need to think about the environment, etc. So there has been that taking place, but the results from the last meeting, this was a meeting in July, the 28th council meeting, and thanks to the leadership from some of the champion states, like I mentioned, Chile, Costa Rica, France, Palau, etc., and a lot of pressure from civil society and different journalists, we were able to prevent the green lighting of deep sea mining, even though I can tell you that some countries and some companies pushed very hard. We achieved the delay on the adoption of the mining code with no strong binding deadline to adopt it, right? And we imposed a discussion on the precautionary pause, which is a moratorium, and a review of the International Seabed Authority for the next assembly in 2024, and strengthen the leadership of champion countries, grow the wave of opposition within civil society. So now we have different financial institutions, companies, indigenous people, scientists, the fishing industry, all calling for a precautionary pause on deep sea mining. But unfortunately, the fight is still not over, because within the 2-year rule, and this is the rule that Nauru triggered, there's a legal loophole, that allows for deep sea mining companies to still be able to submit a mining contract, but theoretically, mining can still begin, but they will have to submit it. It would have to be approved. There's so many different steps and processes that seems very, 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 very unlikely. But the only way to prevent, this industry being green-lighted right now is to get more states to join the call on a moratorium and to be present in 2024 to participate in the different debates.
What does it mean to be a youth representative at the meetings of the International Seabed Authority? What does that look like?
Oh, what does that look like? Oh my gosh. Well, I remember last year when Daniel and myself went, which is, like I mentioned, the Hispano-America Regional Rep at Sustainable Ocean Alliance. We were so overwhelmed by the space because, like I'm saying now, it is so insanely technical with so many moving parts and so many different things that we didn't understand. And, sometimes as young people, we're so passionate about something and we just want to go in there and be like, stop deep sea mining, and you guys are stupid and what you're doing is wrong, etc. But which it comes naturally. That's what you want to say to these people, right? But then we have to realize that in order sometimes to get things moving the way you want, you really need to be strategic. So for us being in that space, especially as a youth, especially with an overwhelming amount of imposter syndrome, we took it upon ourselves to sit down and understand, one, the space that we were in, and two, the people that we were interacting with. So we had a lot of conversations with some of the different NGOs that were present, as well as with some of the different state delegates to understand, the two sides of the argument, to understand why a country is hesitant to use a particular word, to understand why a country might be interested in deep sea mining, to understand, why a country is not interested in deep sea mining, why different things are happening within the meeting, so that when it's time for us to speak and when it's time for us to use our voice, we're coming from a place of, listen, we have the knowledge, we know what we're talking about, and you don't want it to be a case where they're just like, oh, because I know the saying in the Caribbean, empty vessels make the most noise, and we really did not want that to be the representation of youth in the space. We really wanted to seem as knowledgeable as possible, understanding the science, understanding the policy, understanding the laws to the best of our ability. I remember we were very, very, very like just like a sponge, just absorbing and soaking in everything. And the first time, we gave an intervention, Daniel gave an intervention, but when we were present at the International Seabed Authority, Sustainable Ocean Alliance did not have observer status. So we were present underneath different organizations. But this year in the assembly meeting in July, was the first time that Sustainable Ocean Alliance received observer status. So it was the first time that youth had a legit seat at the table to contribute to the protection of the deep sea and to fight against deep sea mining. And to be a part of that, that was something I didn't even, unfortunately, it's not something that happens often in Caribbean culture where we talk about, yeah, let's include the youth, let's work with the youth, etc. But it's really, let's tell the youth what to do and let's hope that they do it how we see they should do it. Right? That's what comes across. When we talk about youth led, there's always half the time a much older person above calling the shots and the youth being either tokenized or, like operating like puppets, etc. But we were there and that was definitely not the case. And to be a part of that was something that I didn't even think was possible. And I remember I gave the very first intervention on behalf of Sustainable Ocean Alliance. And I was just like, I'm here as one person in the room, but I represent thousands of youth across the world. And I was trying my best not to cry because it was just like, so it was so emotional because it's, like I said, it's just something that I really didn't think could happen. And I didn't think I was going to be a part of something like that happening. So to be in the room and to be legitimately in the room and have a seat at the table and have a mic to be able to use my voice, not when somebody says, hey, okay, the youth could speak now. And when we go to these meetings, we don't even have our policy manager present with us. It is literally just the youth present in that moment, making the decisions, following the meetings, etc. So it's wild, it's amazing, it's incredible, it's scary, it's all of the above.
Yes, and thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your experience of having a seat at the table and having the opportunity to share your voice and also your sensitivity that it's not just you, Khadija. You represent, as you said, thousands of other youths who are involved in advocacy and activism, but may not readily have access to decision-making spaces. At the time of this recording, the Climate Gen Z conference is happening where, it's about encouraging and promoting Gen Z to be involved in climate activism and advocacy. And you made an important point about the process that you engaged in terms of being strategic and being able to, and being informed to be able to make meaningful interventions in the discussion. And definitely we have seen that youth tend to be tokenized. It tends to be an add-on. But I'm really glad that in this space, youths are being integrated into the process and given a seat at the table. And I hope to see more of this, in more spaces around climate change, sustainable development, and sustainable development in general. Because we know that the younger generations are inheriting the planet and they are inheriting the effects and the consequences of the decisions that are being made today.
Fully agree with you. Yes, preach.
Khadija, you mentioned Papua New Guinea being left in 100 million USD debt. You mentioned Jamaica, the Jamaica Blue Minerals Company, so that indicates that there is some level of interest in deep sea mining here in our region, right in our backyard. So is the Caribbean at risk, and how do you see deep sea mining affecting us?
All right. So, just to clarify real quick, so right now, the area where they really want to do deep sea mining is an area called the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, and that is basically between like Mexico and Hawaii. So it's in the Pacific, right? And the company from Jamaica, the Blue Minerals Jamaica, when it is they do decide, if it is they do decide to uphold their contracts, it would be to mine in the Pacific Ocean. And I can tell you for a fact, a lot of the indigenous Pacific leaders, as well as the citizens from most of the Pacific countries, they definitely don't want deep sea mining and to be the ones to suffer the impacts of deep sea mining firsthand. And imagine as a Caribbean state knowing that we are contributing to that problem, to our fellow small island developing nation. It's just like, why? But to go back to your question of it impacting the Caribbean, a lot of times when we get asked this question, myself, and like I mentioned, Dr. Diva Amon and several others, when people ask like, well, why should we in the Caribbean? This is not even going to take place in our waters. Why should we care, right? And the first thing we always say, and I always remind people, is that it is literally one ocean and it does not know borders and boundaries. If a fish is in St. Lucia, for example, and it just decides to go on a swim, it's not going to say, hey, I'm in Dominica now. Oh my God, I just reached the Bahamas. Look at me, I'm in Miami. It doesn't know these things. As far as it's concerned, it's just in the ocean, right? And with that one ocean, literally whatever happens one place, the effects will be ripple and the effects can be felt elsewhere, right? And we're already seeing so many different changes happening within our ocean right now that is so scary to go and add a whole next problem and not know exactly what that could do. And we already one of the biggest studies, like I mentioned, is the fact that there's a huge possibility that it could impact the fisheries industry. And the fisheries industry is one of the biggest economic earners for Caribbean countries, as well as is a main food source. And who does not like to eat, right? So as soon as you start to interfere with people's food and with people's livelihood, then you're already creating big, 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 big problems. And those are some of the major impacts right now, as well as, like I mentioned, the deep ocean is definitely our main climate regulator. And to go and interfere with that, like we're already suffering the impacts of climate change and we need as much help as possible. So we should be trying our best to restore the health of the ocean, to make sure that we have our biggest supporter right next to us with all the other different solutions and technological advancements that we're developing, to make sure that we have that there in conjunction to be able to fight against climate change, not have it be hampered and go and interfere with that to make the impacts even worse. Because right about now, we all know that we are in no position to deal with more impacts of any kind, worse yet, impacts related to ocean or climate change, right? Because right as we speak, rising temperatures, and we're seeing already so many of our coral reefs being bleached. We're seeing just so many different things happening, and it's just like we also don't have the capacity, the financial resources, anything to deal with any more issues in our ocean. And unfortunately, something like the deep sea is seen as something that is the ocean on a whole, right? It already represents generational trauma in the Caribbean. And then when you go and throw in the deep sea into it, it's just like, oh my God, that is a completely scary place. But more than that, it is something that is totally out of sight and totally out of mind. So we're not even thinking about all the benefits that we get from it right now. And it's just like, there's so many other things that we could conceptualize that are tangible, that we could see, that we could feel, that we could relate to, that sometimes we don't really take these things into consideration. But if I tell you right now, take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out, take a next deep breath in, take a next deep breath out, then guess what? That second inhale, exhale, it came from the ocean, right? So it's just like, I don't know, the biggest thing is that it's just really and truly all connected, and we can't take any aspect of it for granted. And we can't think just because we're in the Caribbean and it's not happening in our body of water that we're not going to experience any impacts whatsoever. Because it's a big moving industry and there's just so much unknowns and so much that we are not prepared to deal with once things do decide to be green lighted.
Yeah. We don't have to burn to learn, right?
Pretty much. Pretty much. That's exactly it. And we've been burning. So I feel like we've learned enough
Should be
to know
learning.
to leave it alone.
We're burning, but we're not learning, apparently. Khadija, you are advocating for more Caribbean countries to be aware of deep sea mining and involved in the decisions being made at the International Seabed Authority. And I have to commend you for your youth advocacy on behalf of not just the youth of the region, but the region at large. But what more can be done to raise public awareness about the issues, and how can we support your advocacy work?
Hmm. What more can be done? So much more, so much more. And I also feel like I'm not even doing enough, but clearly it's already making an impact because, like you mentioned, you came across the topic because of the work that SOA Caribbean and Eco Vibes has been doing, as well as so many others. So we're so glad for that support and to know that because sometimes you put content out there and you have no idea if people are really connecting with it, or if they're just double tapping, giving it a like, and then just completely moving on afterwards. Right. But one of the biggest things that we really need right now, like I mentioned, is we need Caribbean countries to be present at these meetings. Every single voice matters, and the meetings are severely unbalanced. And we need all the parties. There are 168 states that have ratified UNCLOS, and a lot of those are Caribbean countries, and they are not present. They are not present in the room, and they're not present during the assembly meeting. And the assembly meeting is where we could develop things like general policy and discuss the roadmap to a precautionary pause or precautionary principle. Sorry, a precautionary pause or a moratorium to make sure that we have the protection of the deep sea. But if it is the voices aren't present, then we can't make those decisions. Trinidad and Tobago is very much in the room. So we need to also push some of the states that are in the room. So Trinidad and Tobago is in the room, Jamaica is in the room, and those are the two most prominent countries present at the meetings. And we really need to do our best because as we speak, Trinidad and Tobago is the vice president of the council meeting. They were elected vice president during the meetings in July, right? But we really need our country to take a stance and protect the deep sea against this, as well as Jamaica, as well as countries like Barbados. When you think of climate action, a lot of people, the first person that comes to mind is, Mia Mottley instantly, right? But we really need countries like Barbados to also take a stance, St. Lucia, the Bahamas, etc., all the different countries, like I mentioned, who are parties of UNCLOS, to really show up and lend their voice and know that, hey, we are hearing about this. We know this is something that could happen. We don't have the resources to deal with it. We don't want it to go forward. And this is why, and we are here to voice our concerns and our opinions and to make sure that the International Seabed Authority does its job to protect the deep sea more than anything else. And yeah, that is like one of the biggest asks we have because we can't, you have to be in the room. You have to be in the room and it's just going under the radar. And like I said, I didn't know about it. There's so much other people that didn't know about it. And I understand that we have so many other different problems and we don't have sometimes some of the legal experts or resources are stretched so thin, especially since the International Seabed Authority. The meetings are so often. But for meetings like the assembly meeting, which is once a year, we definitely need all countries present to lend their voice to the cause of the protection of the deep sea. And then as well as do your reading, do your research, look up things. There's so many different resources out there from Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, World Wildlife Fund, Greenpeace, Sustainable Ocean Alliance, etc. All these different organizations. And even coming up in October, there's an Ocean Uni, and the program is called Culture in the Deep, where you could learn all about deep sea mining, the science, the policy, everything, why the deep sea is so important, etc. So if you know the topic pique your interest, then I definitely encourage you to read as much as possible so you can understand why we've been advocating so hard for this. And then keep talking to others, keep spreading, because this is not something that is as common and as is conceptualized as pollution. I feel like every single person on this planet could connect to the issue of pollution, whereas that's not the case with deep sea mining. So we need as much voices as possible. So, and we also have things on our social media as well as on Sustainable Ocean Alliance social media that you could definitely share or reach out if it is you want to learn more, get more involved. And we have a lot of different campaigns and projects coming up surrounding the topic as well. So you could look out for that. And yeah, we just need as much voices as possible. And then we need our leaders to be present in the room.
Yes, get in the room. So I want to give you the opportunity, Khadija, to plug your podcast, Eco Vibes Environmental Creatives.
Oh my gosh, yes. So I also have a podcast. This is a very unique experience to me. I am on the other end, and I'm not gonna lie, it's so nerve-wracking. I now understand why when people come on my podcast, they're so nervous. Because I've been sitting out here like, oh my God, I'm talking crap. I'm talking crap. But I know that's not the case. But yeah, so essentially what I try to do with the Eco Vibes podcast is literally just have environmental conversations with people from across the world, but mostly youth. I believe that, the stories are very powerful and it's something that we could connect to, and not all the time a scientific paper or an article or even a book would pique your interest, but something about people and hearing their stories and hearing their solutions and hearing some of their issues and knowing that, hey, this is a problem that is also happening in Fiji, for example, it's happening in Trinidad, it's happening in Lisbon, etc. Something that we all could connect to and work towards and just build a network of youth leaders. Like that was the inspiration behind the podcast. And that's all I try to do, continue amplifying youth voices. And same thing with, and that's why it falls underneath the company Eco Vibes Environmental Creatives, which was created to put environmental content out there that people could digest, but again, always have that youth perspective, develop programs to make sure that youth could be efficient and effective leaders, and then have fun with it, right? That's why it's called Eco Vibes, because we're not here to fall asleep being environmentalists. We don't just want to be boring tree huggers. We want to make environmental action, climate action at the end of the day fun, because we need to keep our mental sanity. So, yes.
Yes, good vibes only.
Always. Oh, and you could find the podcast on every platform. How did I forget?
Yes, guys. So check out Eco Vibes podcast on your favorite podcast app. So as we wrap up today's episode, Khadija, I want to ask you, what would make the world a better place?
That is such a loaded question. And I don't know if it's because I'm hungry right in this moment, but as soon as you asked that, I was just like, food. What will make the world a better place? I think for people to genuinely reconnect with people and remove greed and envy from the heart of some of the things that they're doing. Yeah. I don't know how to explain it, but like in my head, I know what I mean.
No, that's very
I
deep. That's very deep. And
yeah.
I think you have given us all something to ponder on. So thank you for that.
Okay. I hope so. Okay.
I agree that we need to reconnect with people at all levels, as individuals, as organizations, as corporations. How do we get back to that point of being connected with people and value?
Yeah, I don't know.
And if you value people, you would also value the environment, right?
Exactly. That's pretty much it. in a nutshell. You want to make sure that everybody have access to all. But if you value yourself, you want to make sure that you alone have access to everything. So yeah, which is part of that greed that I was talking about. And I feel like that could be a whole next podcast episode. So we're not even going to dive deeper into that.
So, Khadija, how can listeners connect with you?
All right. So if you want to connect with me, you can follow me on all socials. It's at Eco Vibes, and Vibes is spelled VYBZ. If you're from the Caribbean listening, it's like Vibes Cartel. If you're not, then just note that VYBZ is the spelling. And I also have a website, www.ecovibes.com, and you will find access to everything. Reach out, ask questions. I'm also on LinkedIn, Khadija Stewart. You can mention that you came from the podcast. I will be very happy and excited to connect with you and to just continue building this network and keeping the ball of climate action and ocean conservation rolling.
Great. So thank you so much, Khadija, for joining me on the Climate Conscious podcast to bring awareness to the issue of deep sea mining and highlighting what we need to know about this controversial issue, the ongoing regulatory process, the sustainability issues, and the risk and uncertainty surrounding deep sea mining. And of course, I must thank you for your ongoing advocacy, and we'll be paying attention. So continue to share your contributions to the fight against deep sea mining.
So real quick before we go, the next council meeting at the International Seabed Authority in Jamaica, which again looks at the development of the regulations and the different discussions surrounding the 2-year rule and moving forward and the roadmap, etc. Those conversations are going to be held in October 30th to November 8th. So definitely stay tuned to Sustainable Ocean Alliance social media as well as my own, etc., to hear more on the developments of the conversation, to find out how many more states have decided to join the movement for a precautionary pause and what else is developing in the space of deep sea mining and the protection of the deep ocean.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Climate Conscious podcast. Write to us at theclimateconscious@gmail.com or simply leave a review on your favorite app. Remember to follow The Climate Conscious on all social media platforms.